Hello, my friends. I am Rick, and this is your seat at the table. And hey, once again, we are continuing in a little bit of a deep, not so deep dive, shallow dive into the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons world from 100 years ago. Not quite that long ago, but some days it feels like it. If you've been following anything in the D&D world, there's been a lot of hubbub and controversy with between Wizards of the Coast and the fan base. And right now, we're hearing a lot of victory dances and victory laps by the fans that they managed to actually hold Wizards to accountable and to get them to change their mind. And being the pessimist that I am, I cannot emphasize enough the corporations won't give it in. What they want to happen will happen, and it's going to just take a little longer, and they're going to get a little sneakier about it. But I suspect over the next year, they will see everything that they've wanted to change when it comes to their open gaming license come into play. And I would be highly surprised if we don't see a crackdown on copyright issues and violations. I never had an issue, like I said before, of Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro turning a profit, i.e. they're a business, they need to make money. And they need to generate money to produce new material to provide to the fan base. I do get cheesed when I find when it starts to come across that the people who run the show in these quote corporations really don't think much of the fan base who's created, they created a game, they build up a business, but they build it up because of people like you and I. We spend the money on this material, not them. We keep them employed. We keep them employed creating new material for us to spend our money on. That's the hard truth of the fact. That's the way this has always worked. So from the earliest day, Gary Gygax actually actively encouraged third-party people to step up and to create content and material that was compatible with the material he produced, because he understood that the wider range of the stuff out there, the bigger the draw, the more people will become focused and enjoy the hobby and invest in it. So the fact, though, is when you see there is actually a point in time, though, if you want to go from the perspective of a large business, that when you see third parties making large amounts of profits, being extremely successful to the point of almost being rivals, or the potential for being rivals, at that point you kind of have to, with an open gaming license, you still have to kind of sit back and go, now, is that fair? So if you have a say, and they say, look, if you make X amount of dollars over using products that are basically piggybacking off of our core stuff, then it's only fair that we should get a piece of the action. But they should approach it like that, and perhaps approach it on an individual basis. I don't know. And I suspect that we will see everything they want eased into the license over time. I also highly suspect, and this is in part because the people at Hasbro and core of the people in charge over at Wizards are video gamer. Tabletop virtual gaming is a big thing for them, and they believe that's where all the real money's at today. And I honestly expect them to segue into that fully. I can see them taking D&D out of the actual tabletop genre and eliminating that altogether. We may actually see a succession of sourcebook material and game material for that franchise come down the road. And especially if they're really pushing this virtual tabletop system that they want their one D&D to be a part of. The idea being then is everything is digitally, and even if you spend $30 or $50 to buy a core book digitally, and what do you end up with? A digital version of this. Are you allowed to print it out as a PDF? Do you really want them? Do you want a shelf full of PDFs? I mean, I've been doing them. You watch my channel. I'm starting to, PDFs is where a lot of information is still available, or is never going to be available in print. The only way to get it, and for me, is to physically print that thing out. And if you haven't seen other stuff from my channel, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. This is a PDF, and I bought it, and I printed the damn thing out, and then I got a binder, and I bound it up so I have a physical item that I can carry with me and take use of, whatever. So anyway, the downside with having total digital control over something is they have total digital control over something. And that means if they decided tomorrow that you've spent $500 to buy digital tokens and digital characters and digital minis and digital source books and et cetera, that's all void and outdated, they can just shut it off. They control the server base that your stuff sits on. They control the tabletop virtual setup technology software that allows you to plug and play those things. So if they decide the current version of whatever is needs to be replaced, then this is a never-ending well for them, a never-ending journey of their hands dipping into our wallets. And that's the hard truth. So anyway, enough of that rant. This is the actual first edition Monster Manual. Of the 3 core books that came out of Gary Gygax's advanced series, the Player's Handbook, which I've done a video on already, was the most crucial. The second being the Monster Manual. If you have the handbook and the manual, you can play the game. You don't necessarily need to have the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, as I said in the handbook version, obviously this is not the actual first edition first print. First edition's first print has a different cover on it. And I did not, I did have that, and because of the Satanic Panic, my mother burnt that. And then so by the time I went back and repurchased the new one, that this book here, this is the 10th print. It says it right here inside the cover, down here, the 10th printing of the first edition Monster Manual. And so for all intents and purposes, aside from the artwork on the cover, it is the same book as the very first issue that was put out. And this one here was $15 when I bought it, and I bought it in 1982. So there, right? And the funny thing about the Monster Manual, it's what I've always found appealing is that for the lion's share of all the entries in here, if you go to the most current version of 5.0 and the pending 1 D&D, you'll find pretty much everything in those books just slightly enhanced or upgraded for modern consumption that were here in the original book. And there were so many applications, and there were a number of things in here. Even as a kid, I couldn't figure out how to create a creative way to put them in the game that didn't make sense. The brain mole, for example. I mean, there were times where it wasn't until I got to be much older that I started to understand some of the nuances behind some of the entries. Most of them are pretty straightforward. I mean, you know, it is what it is. It's like this whole chapter on dinosaurs and demons and devils and things like that. It's this stuff here that my mother saw that really freaked her out. She was thinking, oh my God, so we are trying to learn. You know, her being the diehard Christian that she was, really found this to be very disconcerting and not something she wanted her teenage boy to be involved in. And of course, like I said, it took her father, my grandfather, who was a fire and brimstone Bible thrower, a thumper. I mean, he really was an old school tent revival type preacher man, to say that she was being a fool and she was being suckered in by this hysteria that was stupid. And I would have honestly thought he would have taken their side. And he looked at the material. He didn't care for it, but he said it's just a book, and it's not the person who's behind, you know, who's playing this game. It's something else. If there's problems, it's problems with their family life, their society. But it was just foolhardiness. And that was when Mom relented and allowed me to start repurchasing the material. Which, of course, like I said, I had to get the 10th printing because, you know, the original stuff was toast. So, like I said, you go through here, and just about any other Monster Manual, and there's numerous addendums and extras and Monster Manual 2s and 3s and so on, where they've really reached out to create yet more baddies and more foes, more things for you to combat and to cope with and to deal with, to expand. More importantly, to provide them with more material to incite you to purchase another book. One of the key things of interest that one might want to think about is who really buys this stuff. This is one of the things that the one D&D and virtual platform is wanting to try to change. The lion's share of material that's produced is actually being produced for a smaller number of people. The dungeon masters traditionally are the ones who buy 90% of the material. The players generally don't go out and buy a plethora of support source books and extra books, because unless it's something pertaining to something that they specifically want to be or do, or they're amateur GMs who really want to read the material and absorb it, the lion's share is that they're going to be bought by people like myself and some of you, and then we become obsessed by it. We buy and we buy and we buy. I often point out, when I was a young man, and early days, when I went to work when I was 16, that would have been 1983, late 82, 83, about the time I bought this book, I was making $3.35 an hour minimum wage, working 40 hours a week for that. And so my take-home check would be like $150, $170 on a good week. And I would go to Ivor's dungeon and easily spend $50 a week. Almost a third of my check. Now this book's $15. I'd buy 2 or 3 or 4 books and maybe some minis on weeks when there wasn't a book to come out that I wanted. I was always buying novels in addition, and more minis. I mean, it's an expensive hobby. You are in the hobby, if any kind of significant way, you understand fully what I'm talking about. And so this is just the way the things work. Like I said, this book here is timeless. First edition, second edition, third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition, doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, I never needed to buy another set of books other than these. All I needed to do was find players that were willing to understand this was the format I chose to use. My personal preference, of course, is 3.0. And there's always the detractors that talk about THAC to hit armor class 0. Well, guess what? This predates that. That code doesn't come out until 2nd edition, roughly the early 90s, late 80s. And then it gets dropped. It goes through an evolution, and it had some advantages. People got used to it. That's what we had. It's what we used. And then they introduced 3.0, which is often called 3.5. And I've never quite gotten the nuance between 3.0 and 3.5, because there's not an actual whole set of different core books for 3.0 and 3.5. We just call it 3rd edition. The 3.5, this is a thingamabob that came about after the video game really craze took off, and more people started using computer jargon, because the 0.0 stuff, that's basically how that plays out. So this is 1st edition, 1.0. It's just 1st edition. And I'm sitting over looking at 2nd edition, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player Handbook, sitting over here peeking out of a pile of stuff at the edge of the table. So, I mean, and it blatantly says in blue underneath, in blue and red, says 2nd edition. So, if you have this book and the Player Handbook, you can play a game. Pen and pencil, some paper, some stuff to write on. We're good to go. There's another thing. Damn, this is Frankie. Frankie leaves stuff out, and she gets her teeth into it and starts pulling on. I don't get it. Oh, anyway, so hey, Monster Manual, 1st edition. I don't know if you ever come across these and you can get them without paying an arm and a leg for it, I would do it just for the sake of the interest. You're going to find, though, that just about all the material in here really hasn't evolved all that much through the various editions. The Platinum Dragon is still the Platinum Dragon. Grant you, they've got much better art than they did then, obviously, but the stats, the mechanics, how they work, they really haven't changed that much, in my opinion. You got an opinion on that? By all means, put it on there. Talk about it. Let's get a discourse going about it, right? Hey, until next time, you guys should have yourself a great weekend. Going on, my friends. This is Rick, and hey, if you like the channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, tell your buddies, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell anybody else that's in the gaming industry or gaming fandom that says, hey, this is a channel worth checking out.